Have you ever felt so helpless that you became hopeless? That's a dangerous place to be. It's been said that people can survive for several days without water, but not for a moment without hope. Just imagine yourself on a nice warm fall afternoon. You're fit as a fiddle, you're gone for a run, you've come back, but you're pushing the envelope a little bit. You got a lot of things to do. You haven't hydrated well that day after the run, and so now you're doing some other work, trying to move a mattress, get it up some steps, the back of the house, and suddenly you're overcome by a cramp in your stomach. It doubles you over, and suddenly you fall over. And in the impact that results, you go into a seizure. Paramedics have to be called. You're taken to the hospital. Emergency surgery is conducted. Part of your skull has to be removed so that the burst in your brain area can be repaired, and they're hoping for the best. That's a pretty desperate place to be. And it's the place where I was back in 1997 after a nice run, but I was pushing the envelope just as I mentioned in that scenario. And I found myself in the hospital recovering with hopes that I would get better. My wife, while I was there, admitted to the emergency, was already filling out paperwork because I'm an organ donor in case I didn't make it. So it was a dire circumstance. And I was moved from there to Walter Reed Medical Center. It just so happened that as an Army chaplain, I was there for a year of training to become a hospital chaplain of all things. And I was in my first unit. I had just been there for a couple of months. And now I found myself as a patient. I had never felt so helpless before. Helpless to the point of almost feeling hopeless. I didn't know if I was going to get better. But I did get better, and there were some reasons why. First of all, there was my faith, even though after the accident happened, going through the pain and the trauma and the recovery process, sometimes, my faith was not very strong. But it was there. It was in the picture. Also in the picture was my family, my wife, my kids, other family members, and beyond those family members that were so precious and important to me in that recovery process were my friends. And the friends that I had made there at Walter Reed Medical Center were fellow students. They were also chaplains going through the training, and they got to be with me during the whole recovery time. And I really benefited a great deal. And the other factor that was necessary for me to get well, which I'm really not inclined to want this in the picture, but it always is. Whether you are suffering from a physical impairment, injury, or emotional, or spiritual, or any kind, that fourth ingredient is absolutely necessary, and it's the ingredient of time. It took time for me to heal. With faith, family, and friends in the picture, it still took time for me to move from being helpless to hopeful. This is really the story of Israel through the centuries, and so much of their time, they're in a helpless state, and it's a state that they really brought on themselves, not unlike that run I was on. If I had hydrated, if I had done the things that I should have done, if I had taken a break and not pushed too hard and too far, that wouldn't have happened. Well, Israel crossed the line so many times, and God let them, and it got them into some situations that were apparently, at least in their eyes, sometimes hopeless. But God is the God of hope, isn't he? So let's go back a little ways and just take a look at a scenario in the time of the history of Israel where it was at its glory days when King David was on the throne. But then after it passed on to his son Solomon, the kingdom became divided, and then Assyria destroyed the northern kingdom, and then Babylonia destroyed the southern kingdom, and it was just a mess. And the temple had been destroyed, and then it was rebuilt, And then some things were happening around 168 BC. There was a Seleucid ruler, Greek descent. This is one of the rulers of the time who came into the area. His name was Antiochus Epiphanes. He's called the madman, Mad Epiphanes, Mad Antiochus, and there's good reason for that. So he comes in to the region right there where we have Palestine, and he is concerned, evidently, that there is maybe unrest among the people. Maybe there is the potential for revolt, and he wants to squash that, stop it in its tracks, and he does, in a way that is way, way, way over the top. And what Antiochus does is he comes in and he desecrates the temple, among other things. This is called the abomination of desolation. He sets up a statue of Zeus there on the temple altar, offers a sacrifice, and he bans all Jewish festivities and celebrations and rituals and so forth. Well, if he thought that there was a revolt simmering before, well, the revolt unfolded then. And it happened in the form of a guerrilla warfare type of response on the part of certain Jews, zealots, to put things back in order. And their leader, the ringleader, was a guy named Judas, and they gave him the name Maccabee. This is the Maccabean Revolt. Maccabean. It means the hammer. Judas the hammer, and that hammer came down hard on that Seleucid king, and for years, several years, they were conducting guerrilla warfare. And finally, about 4 years after that desolation, the sacrifice was made on the altar, Judas, with his entourage of others, they reestablished the altar and the sacrifices that were made then again to the Lord and commemorated it. And that's Hanukkah. And last Sunday, the first Sunday of Advent, was also the first lighting of the candle of Hanukkah. And that candle was the one that they only had oil for 1 day, and yet it continued for 8 days. And that's why the menorah has all those candlesticks coming out of the one that are lit over the course of that week. It's just an amazing time. So I want us to see that this hopeless state became very hopeful under a leader like Judas. Well, you know, times go from good to bad to good to bad, and they went bad again. And eventually, about 100 years later or so, 63 BC, Pompey comes in. Now Rome is in control. The Empire of Rome is in place, and they establish themselves among many other places right there in Jerusalem. And Pompey sets up leadership there. And about 20 years later or so, he puts Herod in the position of king. So he is a puppet of Rome. And then some 20 years or so later, he starts building this magnificent temple. So it looks like things are going back in a good direction, a right direction, but no, not at all. No, this is a pretty helpless time for Israel. They're under the foot of Rome. Rome is tolerating them enough to allow them to conduct their religious activities, but they're under their authority. Will hopeful days ever come again? Well, during this time of apparent hopelessness in Israel's history, a man named Zacharias, he's a priest. He is going to do his priestly duties. He just happened to get tabbed to go in to offer the sacrifice in the holy place. He's an old man. And while he's in there, he has an experience like he has never had before. The angel of the Lord appears to him and says, Zacharias, your prayers have been answered. I'm thinking, Zacharias is going, what prayers? Who is this one? What's going on here? Well, Zacharias and his wife Elizabeth, they never had children, and they had prayed for a long time. I'm sure by now they had stopped praying because he's old, she's old. didn't happen. I guess that was God's will. And now this figure, this celestial being says, the Lord has heard your prayer and your wife will have a child. Well, he doesn't believe it. And he questions the angel. And as a result of it, he's unable to talk. And so when he comes out from doing his duty there in the temple, everybody knows something happened here. But he can't tell them specifically. And even if he could, what would he say? Does he tell his wife? He doesn't say. He's kind of alone in this. He's given this message that he's going to have a son. And this son, whose name would be John, would be the one who would go before, the one who would set things in order, the Messiah that they had all been waiting for. This is the hope of the world. And in that time, that was a hopeless time in Israel's history. And Zechariah was at an impossible place in his life to have a child, an impossible place, a helpless time, and yet hope is injected there. And it's really, probably not until Elizabeth realizes that she is pregnant, this is my take on it, that she lets her husband know, and he says, yeah, I know. Well, so now his faith is strengthened, and he has this experience with his family. Remember, faith and family, his wife, and they're sharing this together, but not likely with many other people, if any. This is just amazing. Meanwhile, there's another visitation, this time in another place. It's in a know-nothing town called Nazareth. And Nazareth is not even mentioned in the Old Testament. So if we had a hopeless time, and this was a hopeless time of sorts in Israel's history, this was a hopeless place. It didn't really amount to anything. Certainly would not be the place where the Messiah would come. And there's an impossible situation here. The impossible situation was a woman and her husband who were too old to have children. Here we have a young girl who's not even married, and so she can't have children, at least not at this point, when she is visited by Gabriel, who says, you have found favor in the eyes of the Lord, and you shall be with child. And that angel imparts to her this good news, this news of hope, the news that all of Israel had been waiting for, to this young girl. How does she take it? How can this be? I'm a virgin. And Gabriel says, the Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. And for that reason, the holy offspring shall be called the Son of God. How did she respond to that one? How would you have responded? She responds with faith. Faith. That's that first word, faith. She says, be it done to me according to your word. Behold, the handmaiden of the Lord, be it done to me according to your word. That's faith. And it is. But who's she going to share this with? This news, it's kind of like the situation with Zechariah. Who's he going to tell? His wife? Who's she going to tell? Her husband-to-be, whom she has not had relations with yet? No. She runs to Elizabeth because the angel has told her about Elizabeth, who happens to be a relative. Faith, family. It's really good to have company when you're going through something that may be devastating, an almost hopeless situation, or amazing and very hopeful, but you haven't yet connected the dots necessarily. You got to share it with someone, and she does. She makes her way to Elizabeth, and when she arrives, Mary arrives, Elizabeth is so moved that the baby within her leaps inside of her. She feels him, and he's filled with the Spirit. She is filled with the Spirit. And the Magnificat, as it is called in the Scriptures, that follows this first chapter in Luke's Gospel, it's just marvelous. It's amazing. She is just filled with joy and hope of what's coming. Family with Elizabeth. And ultimately, the friends that follow as things unfold over a long period of time. There are friends that are part of this inner circle of people that Zacharias and Elizabeth shared with and understood and supported them. Many did not, but many did. Likewise, and maybe even more so with Joseph and Mary, supported them, encouraged them. That faith, family, friends, and time. Bear in mind that John, the son of Zacharias and Elizabeth, it took 30 years for him to grow up and begin his public ministry, which was very short, but it was 30 years. And likewise with Mary, 30 years that Jesus grew up as her firstborn son, who became the head of the household and was the carpenter as his father evidently had passed away. He's not mentioned later on, and he does not marry, and he's there 30 years. When? When will this come? This promised one, when will it happen? All in good time, which really is all in God's time. Are we willing to wait? One more story, and it's one that is just happened and really took me quite by surprise. 7 years ago, right at this very time, I was in South Africa. I had just retired from the Army, and I had an opportunity to go to a meeting that only happens every 10 years for military fellowships around the world. It happened to be in South Africa. And because at that time, the organization that I've been director of since 2006, Disciplers International, had a connection with a young man, pastor in Malawi, Africa. Hadn't met him. My colleague was working with him and discipling him for about 2 years by then. And he and I went to South Africa, and he said, we ought to go up to Malawi. And we went up there. And it was an amazing experience to be with this family, Patrick and Mervis Reedson and their children. We felt like we were with family. The faith of these people, the sense of family with them, the friendships that we developed. And while I was there, because I always get excited about seeing opportunities that can happen but aren't yet happened, and with Mervis and her heart for children and for teaching, wanted to have a school at some time. That was her goal. So I thought, well, let's build her one. We can do that. Well, I was really getting ahead of myself. And after, venturing into that zone a little ways, not knowing anything about what is life like, not only in Africa, but how do you build something there, and what is it all? I had no idea. And my colleague wisely said, this is not our area of expertise. And so we put that away. And we proceeded to work with this family, the ministry that has grown from 3 churches at that time that they planted to 30, putting 3 of them through college. That would include Patrick and his brother-in-law, and helping them as time has gone by and watching them develop ministries in various areas, to include on their own purchasing a little piece of land, and on their own putting up a structure out of handmade bricks, about 3,000 square feet, and a little office space next to it. And we didn't do anything with that. That was their doing. And then when we saw that they really needed some help, they were doing the best they could, we helped them put a roof on it and windows and doors in it. But there's so much more that needed to be done. And they just said, we'll just wait on the Lord. And they have been doing that for 7 years. And then most recently, when folks from House Church found out, one couple in particular, about what the need was, and questioned more of what was all involved in finishing this, and I shared a little bit of what that involved, and then they made a pledge. and other people jumped in to the tune that in this month of November, just behind us now, enough money was raised to finish it. Wow. Or really, should I say, wow. Look at how hopeful things have become. When I first went there, and there was a sense of hopelessness on the part of so many people, but not on the part of the Rietzens. They're a family of faith, and they were willing to wait just as they had done before. And I've learned an awful lot from them through God about what it is to have faith, about what it is to be a family. And I'm very blessed to have a close-knit family of my own with my wife and my family, but to see that extended family over there in Africa was just amazing. And the friendships. And over time, interesting, 7 years later, now this building, which will be used for a multitude of purposes. It's a multi-purpose building for worship services, for training, for discipleship training, and for education. Wow. God has a way of what seemingly is helpless and allowing us to experience that helpless moment long enough to cry out to him in faith and say, help. Jesus says, come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. Let us find our rest in him. Let us put our faith in him. Let us allow God to move our helpless state to a hopeful state, looking ahead, trusting in him, the family around us and the friends. And by the way, House Church is a family. And the friendships that are formed there, and waiting, because faith involves waiting on the Lord. He will come. This is the season of Advent. We look forward to his coming, not only in this Christmas season when he came as a baby in that manger in Bethlehem, but his ultimate coming. Let us be hopeful, for he keeps his promises.